2, 1.
So welcome to the Board of Education meeting. I want to call the meeting to order. Tonight, we are using closed captioning on the YouTube live stream. Please speak clearly for those speaking during the meeting so the closed captions are as accurate as possible. So would everyone in the boardroom please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. With all God, there is to the understanding. Liberación para Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. Thank you. I'd just like to welcome everyone that's here with us tonight. So next, we'll just have a brief moment of silence for our families and our staff and our community, and also for those that have given their lives in service to our country. Ms. King, may I have roll call, please?
Peggy Mueller-Aragon.
Here.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Here.
Barbara Peterson.
Here.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Here.
Josefina Dominguez. Courtney Jackson. Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Here. First item is the approval for the September 2023 Board of Education meeting agenda. Do I have a motion?
I'll move for approval of the September 2023 Board of Education meeting agenda.
This is Crystal, second.
Okay, thank you. We'll have a roll call, please.
Peggy Mueller-Aragon.
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes. So our next item is approval of the minutes from the Board of Education meeting on September 6th, 2023.
This
I'll
is
move
Crystal.
for-
Go ahead.
I'll move for approval of the minutes from the Board of Education meeting on September 6th, 2023.
And I'll second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Would I have a roll call, please?
Peggy Mueller-Aragon.
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez.
Yes.
Barbara Peterson.
Yes,
Crystal Tapia Romero.
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes, so our next item is the public forum, and I'm going to have Vice President Mueller-Aragon is going to share the instructions for public forum.
Okay, welcome everyone. And welcome to our public forum guests. When you signed up to speak, you were asked to review rules and expectations, which our presiding officer will enforce. The New Mexico Open Meetings Act requires that our agendas specify in advance the items that will be discussed and voted on during the meeting. Therefore, public forum isn't a dialogue among speakers and board members, but rather a chance to hear from our community. We will call participants to speak in the order they signed up, whether in person or virtual. Those here with us tonight will be asked to come to the microphone in the center aisle at the back of the room when their name is called. Online guests will stay in a virtual waiting room until it's their turn to speak. When it is your time, you will be escorted into the main meeting space. Please turn on your audio and video. Once your speaking time is up, you will be ushered back into the waiting room. When you are finished speaking, you may choose to leave the meeting and watch it on live stream. We have set aside 45 minutes for public forum. If there are fewer than 22 speakers, each will have 2 minutes to address the board. If we have 23 or more, each has 1 minute for comments. Please be concise and try not to repeat what others have said. Tonight, I don't know how many speakers there are.
There's three.
There's three. There's three speakers.
They're all in person.
And they're all in person. Okay. Once your time is up, you'll be directed to complete your sentence quickly so others can speak. You may not yield your unused time to another speaker. If we don't get to all speakers, which that should be no problem, you feel you're unable to convey your message, you can email us at boarded@aps.edu. In addition, for those of you here tonight, a representative, I don't think they're here, but from our service center is here to assist you, but they may not be here. Okay, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Member Mueller-Aragon. Our first speaker this evening in public forum is in person, Louis Martinez. Louis Martinez. When you begin speaking at the mic, you'll have 2 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Louis Martinez, and I'm here to address a very serious safety issue that's affecting all APS employees and student body here in the city of Albuquerque. Recently, the New Mexico Senate and House enacted a bill that was signed by the governor into law, and it's House Bill number 7. I have a copy of that bill here in my hands. And basically, this law says that this deals with gender affirming care, and it deals with anything related to health, protecting reproductive, gender affirming health care, providing enforcement, imposing penalties, and prescribing relief. It goes on to say that this bill covers any psychological, behavioral, surgical, pharmaceutical, medical care services, supplies provided to support a person's gender identity. So this does affect schools and school districts like the one here in Albuquerque, which is the largest one in the state. This bill also goes on and does touch on the subject of preventing pregnancies, abortions, and managing pregnancies, loss, and also preventing sexually transmitted diseases. This law also, which is under Chapter 24 NMSA 1978, does come into the enforcement of this law. So anyone that tries to hinder or prevent a student athlete or a student academic from pursuing gender identity can be sued and fined for the amount of $5,000 per offense, and that would be in addition to attorney fees. This bill, in my estimation, has very little to do with the title of gender affirming care, but it really raises a lot of ethical issues like how it affects parents and student athletes. I'm sorry, my phone is breaking out.
Mr. Martinez, you've gone over your 2 minutes. If you can wrap up in one quick sentence, please.
I'd like for you to consider what we can do as a leadership body to really take a serious look at this. Many places across the state are resisting this bill because it lies to parents. It undermines their authority with their child. And also it is also lying to the children too and creating lots of confusion about what is gender.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Geraldo Sonolio. Forgive me if I got that wrong. You have 2 minutes once you begin speaking.
Good evening, Madam President and school board members. Geraldo Sonolio, I'm an alternative health doctor, minister, father, and grandfather. And I'd like to share with you the petition, and I would like you to consider this petition of the Carlsbad Municipal School District Board of Education. And it says, and I quote, whereas in the 2023 legislative session of the state of New Mexico, PED passed legislation concerning reproductive and gender affirming care. Whereas citizens of New Mexico have engaged in a referendum project to appeal this legislation. Whereas reproductive and gender affirming care represent decisions best made by medical professionals and parents. Whereas substantial time, resources, research, and efforts of school administrators and teachers, including nurses and counselors, will be necessary to properly evaluate, carefully consider, and thoughtfully respond to such legal requirements. Whereas other stakeholders, including parents, even grandparents, and others in the community, oppose this legislation. Whereas due to the extreme workload of the school administrators, teachers, and other district personnel that do not have the time or expertise to adequately read, evaluate, research, and respond to the new legal requirements imposed on schools by the state legislature. Now, therefore, the board, by unanimous approval by its members, hereby support the referendum project and its effort to repeal reproductive and gender affirming care legislation currently in state statute. Respectively submitted, Carlsbad Municipal School District Board of Education, Robbie Chacon, President. And again, and encourage all of you, and please consider this, for the sake of our children and grandchildren's health, please follow the example of Carlsbad School Board members. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Jana Perez. Ma'am, you have 2 minutes once you begin speaking. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and sir. My name is Jana Perez. I'd like to speak on SEL, which is the social emotional learning. And it is brought to my attention that some people in a committee that I am a part of, actually the teachers enjoy learning about that program, that SEL program. And then in other places, it enhances the identity of child identities, like changing your identity or what is your identity instead of learning about the education system. Politics in the classroom, I really don't agree with that. SEL focuses too much on children's identity. Children's happiness is based on environment within the home, academic success in their school. How to manage relationships can be a class, but like many selective classes, a parent's involvement and its intent, inclusiveness, details to this curriculum should be transparent, meaning transparent being with the parent's involvement. So including the parent and agreed upon curriculum is my belief that we should have this SEL probably, but with the agreement of the parents, please. Many children that are in the environment less conducive to others, such as gang-related development delayed and other, can fit this SEL curriculum for emotional disturbance, emotional learning, etc. And I'd like to bring to your attention the question, can we agree that SEL can be appropriate for some students, but not all, thus making this a selective class, not mandatory? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Board members and Superintendent Elder, that concludes public forum.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our speakers for coming in tonight. We've listened to your concerns and we're going to move on with our agenda. It's not an opportunity for dialogue. So really appreciate you taking time coming tonight. So our next item that we're going to be going on to today is our student outcomes focused governance. And tonight is our discussion and action is acceptance of a progress monitoring report for goal 3, interim goals 3.1, 3.2, and 3.3, focusing on post-secondary readiness. And our presenters are our Superintendent Elder, Dr. Antonio Gonzalez, Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Chanel Segura, who's our Chief of Schools, and Dr. Richard Bowman, who's our Chief Information and Strategy Officer. Before we get started on that, what I want to tell the group tonight, board members, is that we're kind of moving along here. So this is our last practice session. And although we do have our coach who's ready in the wings, and she's going to be listening to us and will be providing us some guidance as we're going along. But for tonight, we're going to try to get ourselves through this. And so the first part, with this is kind of keeping in line with student outcomes focused governance. The first questions obviously to ask are to confirm that the reports contain all of the required criteria from our perspective. The first thing, does anyone have any evidence that any element of the required criteria for a high quality report is not present? All right, so this is good. That's kind of like our first piece so that we know that the goal clearly shows specific goals, interim goals to be monitored. It has data that tells us for the 3 previous reporting periods, preferably on a line graph. It clearly has content reporting the current period, and it does clearly show the target reporting periods in this part. It also has the superintendent's understanding of systems performance relative to the goal. And it does clearly show supporting documentation that evidences the superintendent's understanding of systems performance. And if the school system is not on target, or the superintendent's understanding of the system's performance indicates implementation is not on track, does the monitoring report clearly describe a systemic root causes, strategic responses, and any needed steps to move along? So these pieces are all clear. And the reason that I'm just stating these two is because we do have an audience that's watching us. And so as we're monitoring, these are the key questions that we're looking for. And these are the pieces that come into a monitoring report. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and turn it over to our esteemed speakers. And we're going to go ahead and cover all three reports so that we'll go through each one. And then we'll come back with some questions. I do want to say, first of all, too, how proud I was of the board. Asked some really great questions. I thought there was some really smart questions in there. Those have all been posted. So the goal is not to repeat those questions, but so that we can start to think about the next pieces and some next clarification if we need any as a result of the presentation tonight. But for the audience and for our folks that are monitoring this, you'll get to see all of these questions and some of the things that were posed so that we'd have greater understanding. But I'm going to allow you guys to present your report so the public can hear where we are with this and what we've learned from this particular goal and the interim goals.
Madam President, thank you. In the script I was given earlier, or the agenda, I noticed that the coach was supposed to jump in between you and me. Did that shift?
Well, she told me that she would be available in the wings. I don't know, Ashley, do you want to jump in any way, or did I thought that was, I followed the process.
I was gonna do an introduction, so you didn't have to, but you did a great job. So thank you, Superintendent Elder, but I'm good if y'all are good.
Very good. I just didn't want to step on anyone's toes before we even got started. So. All right. So before you tonight, we are here, Madam President, members of the board. So these things were printed out and the numbers are very small, or I really have bad eyes. So, but anyways, we're here to discuss goal 3. So I put it on my screen, so it's bigger here. So discussing goal 3, the percentage of high school graduates who earn credit in 2 or more advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual credit courses, or earn an industry certification or bilingual seal will increase from 39.6% in September of 2023 to 49.6% in September of 2028. So interim goal number 1 is the goal where we look at the percentage of high school students who drop out of school. And we are trying to move that number will decrease from 4.2% in May of 2023 to 3.2% in May of 2026. On the figure, you can see that it's a fluctuating number, that it does tend to move because I think a lot of times it has to do with circumstance. When you look at the 3.1% during the pandemic, I believe one of the questions was, why do we think it was low? I think the answer is, where were they going to go? There was no work. There wasn't a job. So I don't think they left as the rate they may have. But then we came back from the pandemic. We know some kids were really struggling with being back in school and being in the routine of school. And so you see a pretty significant increase up to 5.2%. I think now you see it leveling back down into the 4%, which, you know, again, this number will bounce quite a bit, but 4% is a semi-consistent number throughout the years. You can apply those numbers also, reminding that we have a slightly declining enrollment, so the numbers can be impacted a little bit by the denominator changing. These numbers do not include students who attended an APS charter schools. It's pulled from the STARS system, which is now what, Richard? Nova, and this was produced by our SAPR team. When you break it down beyond there, you can start to look at it by the subgroups. And these are not just the Ozzie Martinez subgroups, this is across the board. You see that certainly there are some groups that have historically dropped out at a higher rate. Interestingly enough, females were higher than males, and they traditionally are. I don't think I have an explanation for that. I'm just pointing it out. We definitely see some changes in some of these subgroups, especially Native Americans. Our Native American department, is Indian Ed department, really has been working hard to reduce that number. There's been very targeted specific work. It's never a perfect solution, but that was a target of theirs. One group I want to point out, and Dr. Bowman will probably explain this later. If you look kind of to the right, you see exited ELs. exited ELs perform very well in this district. So, and we'll throw some ideas out as to why that is throughout the evening. But the children who come to us young usually and enter the English language program and then get out of it, they tend to do quite well in our systems. And that's an interesting group to look at. Some of the groups are too small to be really pertinent, so we don't include them. And some of these are, again, small groups, although some are large groups, so we need to keep that in mind. So when we talk about what's going well, we do feel that having the diversity of school choice options within Albuquerque schools to support diverse student needs is helpful. So we do have magnet schools and that students can pick and attend those. We also have a variety of elective course offerings for students from which to choose. We know that quite often electives are what keep kids in schools: fine arts, music, theater, athletics, JROTC, any club. Esports certainly is a growing group, so those are good to keep. Again, having that variety of extracurricular and co-curricular activities and for athletics and activities. Also, we have some schools that are in the process of either running an early warning system or piloting early warning systems. They look at data such as attendance, behaviors, and course grades. They can create reports, and this exists as a tool for schools to inform them when students are beginning to fall off the path and allow for an earlier intervention, and then perhaps one that happens after it's just too late to really turn outcomes. What we're hoping to, well, we'll talk more about that. Albuquerque Public Schools also offers credit recovery options through concurrent enrollment and summer sessions utilizing a number of methods, including both in-person and virtual. What's not going well? We have a concern about the job-specific training for registrars who are responsible for the data input that directly impacts the dropout and graduation rates. Oftentimes, these are transient positions. We don't pay very much. You've heard this before. Sometimes they're hard to find, and it's a fairly labor-intensive job. These are the people that are putting in the credits for the transcripts. These are the people that are putting in the transfer codes. And you have to be very careful that when you put that code in, that it's done correctly. I think the training's there, but we are beginning to wonder if we don't need to sort of revisit and crack back and just make sure that mistakes aren't being made, because those have an impact on our rates. We're going to talk a little bit about the career pathways and core academics not being systemically aligned. We know that whereas we have a career pathway, that work may not reflect in their core classes. That may not reflect in math and language arts. And what we're trying to work towards is, if there are cores and career pathways in the schools, specifically the high schools, that work will be supported throughout their day, not just in that class. So that some of the reading could be perhaps technical reading around, let's say it's a cybersecurity. Maybe they could read some things about cybersecurity. Maybe it's a class on auto mechanics. Be nice if they looked at a technical manual and showed kids how to utilize and operate a manual that they'll see in real life, because those read differently than a novel. And so it's great to have the novels. I don't just don't want to move away from that, but that's where we're saying there's a lack of systemic alignment in some cases. We see it in some places. We'll see teachers have buddied up, but as a system, we need to improve on that. And then again, the inconsistent use of integrated systems of support. So we have early warning systems. We don't have them everywhere. Some people have what they think is an early warning system. Some people have got one that looks different. We really need to look at a consistent use of this integrated system. So to address that, obviously, we're going to be looking at some ongoing job-specific training to registrars who enroll in disenroll students. I know that we have run a mentor program in the past with better, more qualified and talented registrars going out and helping people, especially when they're new in those first few years and can be a little confused. And that's been very productive in the past. Through a curriculum and instruction pathway program review with the Southern Region Education Board, All APS high schools will conduct a data analysis and inventory of current systems and practice by December 19th, resulting in baseline data to create actionable steps in alignment with board goals 3 and 4. We did something very similar last year with the middle schools, and those reports were very helpful. It's an objective report on what's going on in your school and what are some steps you could take. It's not designed to blast individuals. It's not designed to, destroy the school, but it's an objective look and say, you say you're doing this, but we didn't see it. Or even better, I don't know if you noticed, you're doing this and you might want to keep it. And so there's things that come up. That'll help us to create intentional next steps around the consistent integration of the early warning system report usage and so for intervention at the school level. And that is 3.1. Now, last time we discussed just doing all 3 of them up front. Is that what we're still doing? Or, okay. So moving on to 3.2. Again, the goal is students who are increasing students in the dual credit and the AP and IB and industry certification and bilingual seal. This interim goal is the percentage of high school students enrolled in advanced placement, international baccalaureate or dual credit courses, second year or higher language course, or a career pathway concentrator course will increase from 40.1% in May of 2023 to 46.1% in May of 2026. Again, you can now see percentages of high school students enrolled in these types of courses across the years from 2019 through 22-23. We have dropped. We have fewer kids enrolled in those classes. Some of that, I think, can be attributed to certainly during the pandemic, the difficulty of dual credit. It was all online. And the career pathways. We've just lost some teachers in those areas, and it doesn't take a lot to have a significant impact. So we are obviously going to look at how to increase that. In all honesty, we recognize that our advanced placement could grow some. We have advanced placement everywhere, and we could certainly add more courses. Hopefully that would lure more students in. And that would be the goal, is not to have the same kids taking AP classes, but variety of kids taking AP classes. International baccalaureate is going to be extremely difficult for us to grow. We only offer it in one school. We do that for a reason. Fiscally, it is incredibly expensive. Just to hang the sign up costs $10,000. Just to do that, say you're a school, and there's more behind it. I think it's an incredibly worthwhile program. I think it does amazing things for kids. And there may be some ways that the school could look at how it handles those kids and potentially increase numbers, but I'm not sure it would require a fundamental shift from the philosophy of what they're doing there. And if you want details, I can get into that. Industry certification is where we're going to be looking at growth. I think, we do see an upward trend in the bilingual seals, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But industry certification is where we have the greatest potential to meet this goal and grow this goal, and I think is the most exciting. So again, if you want to break down the figures by subgroup on the next page, you see the chart here that gives you a very nice breakdown across the years. If you can read that light gray one to the left, but the red certainly stands out. And you see that we've had some groups do very well, and other groups we need to improve on. I do think it's interesting that in many of these academic fields, we see that females are performing better. And I don't know why that is. I do know that almost every graduation I attended last year, the valedictorian was a female. And it's actually gotten to the point where it's almost odd to have a male valedictorian. Again, I don't have any explanation for that. It's just how it seems to be going. But we definitely can look at the Ozzie Martinez and African-American students and see we need to do a lot better job in terms of getting them into these type of courses. And we'll talk a little bit how we plan to do that. So what's going well is that all high school students have access to a variation of advanced placement, dual credit, and language course offerings at their school sites or through the Career Enrichment Center. I would also add that they are oftentimes able to take courses at CNM And sometimes they will actually take a course at UNM if they pass the AP, not the AP, the ACT, and can get into UNM, pass their graduation entry requirement. There's a foundation of course offerings in advanced placement, IB, dual credit, and language courses that do exist within the district. We have baseline historical data for AP, so we can look at our enrollment in the past. We can look at our exam pass rate. We have that from 2018. Then there was an upward trend in bilingual SEALs achieved at the high school level. We definitely are seeing that become quite desired by our student population. They're proud of it. We do a good job of celebrating it. I think those schools do a good job of really enforcing that. And I see more and more students that are really interested. And they'll tell me when I'm out there, oh yeah, I'm going to get my bilingual SEAL. I hear that one quite a bit at my visits when I ask them, what are you doing in school that you're proud of? Oh, I'm going to get my bilingual SEAL. I'm doing that this year. So that one may grow some as well. We do see an upward trend in dual credit options as students begin to realize the benefits of dual credit. And again, of course, we do have the beginnings of the early warning system to hopefully move students into these type of classes and prevent them from getting themselves in a state where they can't get in. So what's not going well. So we know that we do not have an equitable distribution of these types of courses across the district. Oftentimes courses are offered because we have a teacher at that school that is certified to teach that. And that's it. And if you don't have a teacher, and there are some of the AP classes that quite frankly are hard to get certification on. There's two types of AP physics, for example. And AP Physics C, I think, is the one we teach at most high schools, and it's very theoretical. AP Physics B is more the mechanical engineer type of physics, and that one is taught at CEC because there's a small subgroup of kids who want that. I don't think it would make it an individual school, but looking for those type of offerings, there's just some that are tricky to fill. We used to have AP German. We don't have AP German anymore. There wasn't the interest anymore. And I'm not saying it's disappearing as a world language, but it's not one that's real popular around here these days. Although we are now seeing more interest in courses in students' home language, so we may see a burst of, Arabic or Pashu or whatever might come out of those fields. We'll see. But we do have ongoing challenges with the staffing and funding of those courses because the teachers really have to recruit for some of their more esoteric courses. There was a rock and roll history class at one high school I was at that was mildly popular. And not because of the content, it was just, there was relationship building with the teacher and the students. It just didn't happen. And so it should have been one of these large, really good electives ended up being, it was there. And the kids that took it, they liked it, but not a lot of kids took it because they never got past the recruitment effort. So these are things we're going to have to think about. So as we review and update district procedural directives, we really have to have these conversations about how do we ensure equitable access to course offerings and opportunities district-wide? How do we find people at these schools and get them trained so that they can offer courses? That honestly, AP training is great. I got AP training back when I taught, but it was really hard, and it's a lot of work, and not everybody's made to be an AP teacher. I may have been one of those people. I don't know. I never got a chance. So, but I don't know. I'd like to think I would have done well, but I don't know. So, so they're hard to find, and we do have to find the funding, and we have to sort of be specific on what's kind of the core of AP that really should be offered everywhere. And again, we have those people that are one-offs that really love, it's that Physics B. I'll give you an example. That guy loves teaching it. And the kids love the class, but he's one guy and that's one place. So that's tricky. Again, working with SRIB, we'll have a better sense of all our high schools with their data analysis and inventory of current systems and practice. And that'll help us to create some action steps moving forward. We'd like to increase the number of certified staff. So we are working on ongoing collaboration with institutes of higher education to maintain and strengthen teacher residency programs in specific areas. And I will tell you that the College of Education and Human Services was hosting a series of focus groups over the last week, and they were bringing stakeholders in with the interest to change and grow and evolve the College of Education. And when I got my invitation, I very happily went because I had some thoughts and I shared them. And people in the room shared their thoughts, and we were all sharing the same thoughts. It was pretty clear that they need to change. And so that was a really, really positive thing that UNM's at least thinking about it and looking at it, and they've got a group to help them make some adjustments. So maybe we'll see some change there. But one thing I did push was don't let go of the residency programs. It's one of the best things we've got. Getting people in the classroom for a year with the master teacher is the best thing you can do because they learn how to do it. It's not just the theory. Again, trying to develop enhanced collaboration with industry partners to attract career technical educators. We are hearing more and more from the career technical field that they are more interested in trying something like this. They just haven't quite figured out how to do it on their end. We have some groups that have an idea and we just haven't finished the collaboration, but we're getting there. And of course, we'll have to continue to take the systemic next steps around resource allocation and course offering and student class scheduling to meet goals. So that's going to take some thought on the school's part. Moving into part 3, interim goal. Let me just make it big again. The percentage of grade 11 students who earn credit in at least one advanced placement, international baccalaureate, dual credit, 3rd year or higher language course, or a career pathway completer course will increase from 52% in May of 2023 to 58% in May of 2026. So you see, we were actually over our 58% 4 years ago, but it's dwindled. And again, I think you can point to the pandemic had some impact because kids didn't want to take some of those harder classes online. The career tech courses were harder online as well because a lot of those are very hands-on and that you really couldn't do it. So I think you see a loss of interest, to be honest, and just a sense that they didn't want to do it. That's going to take a little bit of work on trying to recruit and find kids for these courses and convince them that this is worth their while and that the challenge is worth their while. And there are ways to do that. Again, moving on, you can look at the actual numbers if you want to look. Remember, these students do not involve charter schools. And then we move into the breakdown of who does well here. Again, I think we've got something going on in exited EL that we need to look at. It really stands out here. And that was sort of a revelation, I think, wasn't it, Richard? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was when we met earlier to discuss this. He was very excited to point this group out to me. We've seen growth in areas, but we still are really got to look at the Yazzie Martinez decision in African-American students and really try to start pulling them into this class. So again, what's going well, we all have the variation of advanced placement. We talked about that. There is a foundation of course offerings. We do have baseline historical data. Again, the upward trends in the early warning system. What's not going well, the course offerings are not equitably accessible throughout the district, inconsistent use of the systems of support, and then ongoing challenges with the staffing and funding of these courses. What we're going to do next, review and update district procedural directives to ensure there are equitable access to course offerings and opportunities district-wide. Again, we'll have that pathway review and we'll know more about exactly who has what. Again, in trying to increase the number of certified staff. Systemic next steps around resource allocation, course offerings, and then create a system to identify and encourage students to select and enroll in one or more advanced placement courses who have demonstrated AP potential through the PST, their 10th grade year. So as you know, our 10th graders take the PSAT. The PSAT, if they hit a certain score, will throw a star by their name and say, this is a student who has AP potential. And it's my understanding that we meet with those kids and encourage them, you should do something with this. This says you could be an AP student, and the kids say, oh no, I struggle in school, and we need to do a better job of recruiting that. But what we talked about the other day is, do we look at the layer of kids who are just below AP potential? And I don't know how low that goes, but how much recruitment do they get? And what we want to make sure is that AP potential is not the gateway to get into AP. That AP potential helps us to identify students, but that if a teacher comes forward and vouches for this student, for Antonio, and says, this child did not do well in the PSAT. Heck, they didn't take the PSAT. They didn't show up. Things were going on at home. He didn't make it. But that kid's got AP potential. I want him in an AP class. That we follow through with that. That we don't just say AP potential is a gatekeeper. And we need to be real careful about that, because we do know, we say it all the time, it's one test given on one day. Who knows how that kid felt that day? And you know what? There's kids who sail on that test because they like taking tests, and they blow the PSAT out and they go into AP and they hate it because it's not just a test. There's work, they're used to doing on tests. So it goes both ways, but I do think we really talked a lot about this, our systems of identification, and specifically in the Yazzie Martinez subgroups in the African-American, how many of those kids are just below AP potential? And if a teacher stood up and vouched for them and said, I really think with some effort, they could do it. I'm not sure we're saying they're going to go in there and take the test and get 5s. But what I do think we're saying is they would benefit from the experience of taking a college level course and learning what it takes, the effort and the grit and the determination to get through something like that. And who knows, they may get in there and find out they like it, that they really like it and want to do it again. So those are the areas that we are looking at for next steps. I will remind you, this is a very much an implementation goal that we are really building systems right now. So some of the things that we're responding with are either they're in process or they're not happening quite yet. But this was the cycle for this. We will learn. Some of the questions we were asked last time is, what do you see in here? And we're like, well, we haven't really sussed it out from that angle yet, right? But we do learn from these, and it will probably help us in future report outs along these goals as we begin to interpret, because there's a tendency to go, this is the only interpretation of the data. But if somebody else looks at it a different way and says, I see it from this lens and it really says this, that's where we're gonna grow. And what's good is it's not just a few people anymore looking at it, it's all of us looking at it. So with that, I believe we stand open for questions.
Okay. So I do know that you had referenced Dr. Bowman in there around the stuff that we've learned around the exit at EL. I don't know if you wanted to say something here about that or point something out about that before we move on, because he just referenced you and I just want to make sure you had an opportunity. He said we are going to hear more about that, so I just wanted to make sure.
Right. I appreciate the reference. But I will also say that for the purposes of this report, I don't believe that we have anything else, and it's something that we'll be looking at in the future. But it was a subject of conversation.
Okay.
Before.
And just for clarification, so an exited EL.
Let me explain.
Okay, thank you.
So the definition, we have current ELs, which is often what people think of as ELs. We also have never ELs, and these are students who in their registration, they reported their home language survey. It's like 6 questions, and they said English on all of them.
Okay.
And the Exited ELs are those ELs who have exited out of current EL status by passing or receiving a certain score, cut score on the Access for ELs test.
Okay.
So an English test.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you for all that information, because that there was a lot on this, and I really appreciate all the work that went into it. And I think with all the questions too, it just really helped sort of frame like the whole, sort of the deeper dive around some things. So hopefully through the questions, you're also learning about, some of the things that we may struggle with just in terms of like technical terms or just some tactical understanding. So I really appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is that we're just going to move into a conversation about where we are. And so the point of this, is just to not to restate our questions, not regurgitate that again, but to really sort of think through after this presentation, is there any other additional questions that you might have? And if you need some coaching to ask your question, we do have our coach available. But if you feel like you're prepared to do that, I think now we could just invite the board members to just participate in some questions if you've got some at this point. So who would like to start?
I mean, I have a question of Ms. Paz, if she's there. So Ashley, if you're there, what I did is I sent in questions that were my technical and tactical or whatever. I sent those in, but my strategic questions I kept for tonight. So that's what we are supposed to do, right? Because I want to make sure the public might not read all the questions that are posted. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that's what I had done. So, okay, I'm on.
And
All
you're
right.
exactly on target. So the purpose of asking the questions before was just anything that was that would clarify the report or would add some additional piece of it. Tonight is really around the strategic conversation.
Okay,
So
I'm good. All right. Do you want me to just go?
sure, if you want to,
And-
well, and we can, take turns if you want to do that. So we can start
Yeah.
with your first strategic question.
Okay, so I'm going to try to put this all into one. I have like 3 questions, but I think they're basically asking the same thing. So when we're looking at, the data, I'm talking about 3.1. When we're looking at the data, we see that there have to have been strategies that worked for our non-targeted groups because we're looking at those numbers. And so they seem to be higher for the non-targeted groups and the targeted groups. And then also when we're looking about the trends for the Native American, for all those targeted groups, what those trends look like, and we have an idea what they have looked like for the last 4 years. So we're seeing decline dropout rates for our non-targeted population, but not for our targeted groups. So my question in general is like, what is that being attributed to? What strategies are working for those non-targeted groups that may not be working for our targeted groups? So that's kind of in general. And, when you're kind of looking at the populations that are above a 4% dropout rate, and then you see those that are, that are below a 4.4% dropout rate. I mean, what are you counting all of that to have any idea? So it's kind of a big question, but it's kind of the same question. What's working? What strategies are working?
Well, board member, I do think that one of the things that may be helping is the creation of the attendance teams. One of the things we know happens when kids drop out is nobody has reached out. They disappear for a while, and that while just extends too long. So I do think you can look at some of the efforts out of the district, out of the schools, from individuals reaching out to those families and kids and trying to find them. I also think you see that at community schools, where you have a community school coordinator who's much more aware of the community and the individual challenges that families face. So many of our community, and you know that, I'm preaching to the choir here, but many of our community school coordinators have a real deep understanding of what's happening in the community. And when something's going down, they tend to know. And they're able to help in ways that I don't think happened before. We don't have community school coordinators everywhere. And whereas we do have attendance teams, I think they're at various levels of activity. And they do try to meet the legal requirements. And I think there's some who go beyond the legal requirements. So those would probably be two examples. Now, I know, for example, with Native American students, the Indian Ed program was really pushing hard for a while there on credit recovery and really trying to place their kids in situations where graduation didn't seem either impossible or just too far away. And they were being pretty aggressive, especially around summer school, bringing in large numbers of students and putting them on computers and doing computer-aided education, and really helping them with a lot of support recapture credits. So I think that is an example of a focus group effort on one group that really helped. Now, I don't know how they funded it. I just know they did. But that's example of things you see happening where it works.
And now what might not be working for those groups?
Just the lack of the support, I would say, the lack of the ability to have real resources. So sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes families bring challenges that we can't solve. I know we like to think we can solve everything, but sometimes the challenges are so severe with, whether it's a medical situation or it's, somebody is, I don't know, the incarceration has created a situation where the child is sort of, well, they know he's with somebody, but they're not sure where. I've literally heard this, but they don't know where the child is. But they put him with a family member. They just haven't figured out which one yet. And I think there's probably a reason one family member doesn't know where the child is, right? So that's tricky because that kid becomes, if he doesn't come back to school, and oftentimes the child in that situation doesn't come back to school, that's a dropout. So I think it's about alignment of resources and some interventions that actually work. Some, for a while there, and we were having kids having a hard time getting to school because they had to walk through neighborhoods. They did the walking school bus, and they still do that in certain neighborhoods. And that works great as long as there's adults that are willing to do it. When those adults, sometimes, their kids move on to the next grade level and they don't want to do it anymore. And then all of a sudden the other parents have to step up and, well, they got used to somebody else doing it, and it gets tricky to find another walking school bus. So, but those are interventions that we can suggest. It just, again, comes down to manpower and will.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that question, or just,
No,
because I think it's
absolutely.
related to that? Because I'm curious about the Native American credit recovery. Was part of that strategy, because you had mentioned the students there was a focused effort, so they obviously have a cohort of students that they knew, correct? So was that cohort, was part of the strategy, like a case management strategy with that cohort? Potentially, or we don't know?
Madam President, members of the board, the program was funded operationally,
Okay,
and it really goes back pre-pandemic
okay,
to really work around identifying students through an EWS process, who in this case are Native American, that are perhaps struggling with being behind in credits. They were then brought in this model that we're referencing for summer school support around online programming with coaching and support for these students to have a warm touch wraparound services.
well, they
And the result was positive. I mean, we had more students passing these credit recovery courses with targeted support on an online platform, and the program has continued. So we continue to have summer support for our Native American student populations. And I would just add that another component worth mentioning with our Native American student populations is our Indian Ed department has made intentional steps to go into our tribes and pueblos, to work with tribal governments, to work on how we can bring these students into our schools in addition to supporting students who may be behind in credits. So it's that warm touch philosophy and support under Senior Director Phil Farson that has really paid dividends in changing the narrative in a very positive way in how we support Native American students in the district.
Okay, thank you, because it's a real intentional program. Sounds like a great strategy. Okay. No, I will. I just wanted to flag off that. Board Member Gonzalez, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I want to start by thanking you all for the presentation and the data, as well as the visualizations that were part of the follow-up materials and the work done through SAPR as well. So appreciation for that. Regarding goal point 1, as I was listening to you, Superintendent, speak, I heard you refer frequently to some schools have EWS, there's inconsistency, there's lack of systemic alignment, terms like that. So my question is, what strategies will you be using to become more consistent and standardized across the district? As it relates to all of these issues related to goal 3, but it seems like certainly standardization and consistency is a challenge. And so as you think about the reorg that you just completed, the role of cabinet, collaboration across different divisions, staff roles, I'm just curious sort of how do you foster that collaboration, consistency, and some degree of standardization?
Madam Chair and Board Member Gonzalez, we have reorganized. And so with that, we have Mr. Mark Garcia, who is in charge or taking on the leadership of goal 3. And when we look at early warning indicator systems, we started it in a few schools. Some of them have done a fantastic job. I want to shout out to Manzano High School. They've done a really great job with that. And now that we have one person who is specifically overseeing all high schools instead of 4 people overseeing high schools, we're going to have a greater focus and consistency regarding how this is implemented. We also received a grant from PED, an attendance grant that is going to allow us to also pilot it in a few middle schools and elementary schools. And so with the focus, with the reorganization, I know Mr. Garcia, I think he's on an airplane right now back from principal supervision training. And he is very excited and knowledgeable about the EWS system, how to approach it, and has a plan to bring all principals together to start looking at that work, what kind of interventions can happen at each level, and support also what's in their attendance plans, because they have to put together an attendance plan by school. So all of it is coming together. And what we're seeing as we meet as goal teams is the cross-functionality of each department coming together to support the work. So trying to break down the silos and coming together. And so that's kind of the focus.
Okay, I'll move any Board Member Tapia Romero. Do you have a question?
So my question's related to number 3.1. And when you mentioned about what's not going well, you said the career pathways and core academics are not systemically aligned. I was hoping to hear on what we're going to do on the next steps of how we were going to move to that. I guess a greater detail, on what the plan was.
So I've done that at schools before, and it's difficult. So what you have to do, because part of the thing is you've got to schedule kids a certain way, right? So if your kids are in one career pathway, those kids by necessity will sort of need to follow each other throughout as much of the day as they can. And it gets tricky, especially around math, because they don't all exist in the same math level, right? You could have kids who are in geometry, kids who are in algebra 1, kids who are in advanced algebra, and every now and then you get somebody who's, way out there. But you have to group them as carefully as you can. And so that's a scheduling issue. And so you have to make a commitment to that cohort. Then it becomes an issue of the teachers planning together. And that's a little tricky too, because for a while there, we tried interdisciplinary teams. We tried to break them up by teams. And there were benefits and there were cons. We since then have moved back to core teams, which means you work with other teachers in your department, which we've seen benefits, at least academically, but it limits the amount of time that the two cooperating teachers could talk and share material. So you end up having to try to buy time either outside the duty day or inside the duty day by flexing schedules and having somebody sub for, if you were going to pair with Danielle, we would sub your 2 classes for 30 minutes and give you a chance to do some planning together, talk about what type of materials and share materials. So oftentimes the language arts teacher would say, I'm willing to teach these kids how to look at a technical manual. I don't have a technical manual. And the auto guy would say, okay, I'll provide you, how much do you need? And I'll get you enough documents that you can do this. And that right there is a type of collaboration, but it tends to happen more on a granular level and at a school by school level, because unless we have very consistent industry certifications at every school, which I don't think we're going to have, other than we've got the culinary arts is pretty popular. CAD is one we do. I'm really hoping we're going to continue to push out cybersecurity because I think that's got potential. Others are coming. We have all the stuff down at CEC and the kids that attend the early college academy, they do very well with CEC. And I think there's a lot of collaboration at college and career high school over on the CNN campus between what's happening in the college courses and what the high school teachers are trying to support. But at the comprehensives, it's a little hit and miss. And so it'll be a matter of training people how to have that type of collaboration. And if we can build collaboration, and so do we build that in during the PD days? Certainly possible. Do we build time in on the 2 hours we have a month? That's certainly possible. So there's times we have that exist inside our contract that we're paying for, and we can use it. So I think that's the next step in the iteration of the implementation, but it's going to be a little choppy, and I think it's going to look a little different at each school, as the programs are going to be different at each school. But ultimately it comes back to, how do we get these people together to coordinate that work?
Okay, thank you.
I can imagine it's hard. It's a lot of students. Board Member Peterson.
So I really appreciate this ginormous amount of information that you've given us. And the thing that's always interesting is the more ginormous it is to start with, the even more ginormous number of questions that it stimulates and brings up. And so I really appreciate the work that went into answering our questions. And there are a couple where I know it was saying we have more work to do. And so I just really appreciate that, because we'll look forward to getting more deeper answers as time goes on. And so I really appreciate that work. But I did think of, can I sneak in one technical question? Because it just really came to my attention, or was another red flag that I kind of knew and didn't think to ask. Do we have a way of identifying in the data about English learners, are RIEL students, the recently arrived English learners? That's, I guess, the new acronym. And do we have a way of breaking them out? Because that includes a really diverse group of students. And it might be really interesting, apart from some other groups of students who are here from kindergarten on, what happens with these students that hit the US for the first time in 9th grade, 10th grade.
Thank you for the question, Board Member Peterson. So yes, it's a bit of a technical question. We do not have that broken out at this point, but it would be something that we would look at kind of in the future to see. We can calculate a metric, something like number of years in a particular EL status, and kind of do some sort of breakout that way. So it's something that we can look at.
So going forward, it seems like it has real distinct programmatic needs for this group of students. And there are some ideas that I know have been in the district that have been contemplated for a while. So that's something that I just think needs to be brought to the forefront again. And then my strategic, that was my technical question, my strategic question. So I know what the data shows is that it's in 9th grade that we lose the greatest number of kids in dropouts. And a lot of it is just that reality. It sounds like from looking at this, it's that reality hits home and they're feeling overwhelmed. So my question then is, what can we do backing up into middle school to help with that bridge of what's coming, and at the same time pay attention? I keep thinking of some of the results of that middle school task force of developmentally what middle schoolers need. What can be done to both support them there and honor who they are there, and at the same time help bridge that transition into the reality of high school?
Member Peterson, members of the board, I think that's a very timely question, because as we were talking before the meeting, we have the SREB high school visits taking place as we speak. And the reports and findings, recommendations that they are going to yield are going to be specifically tied to their feeder middle schools, who have already had this visit. Really, the stars align beautifully in that we are getting recommendations and supports on how to align our middle school programming with our high school programming and vice versa. In other words, we have our middle school staff going to the high schools as we speak right now, giving those recommendations as the high school folks were in the middle schools in the spring. So if we're talking about goal 3 specifically, for example, we will see how course taking patterns, how pathways are going to be able to be aligned in a way that is meaningful, that can be messaged and communicated to our students as they begin to anticipate in middle school their high school experience. I also think, just kind of touching on Member Gonzalez's question earlier in terms of how we are aligning the work, is there's a real connection here to Goal 4, and how through EWS, for example, we're leaning in on the pilot and our partner, Johns Hopkins University, to see how we can take that work, learn from it, connect it to the work of Goal 4 as we've moved forward in transitioning the student experience from middle school to high school.
Can I do a follow-up?
Okay, one more.
That just to push a little bit harder, what can we do to still protect what's developmentally appropriate in middle school and still create that pathway? I mean, and that comes down, I think, both to expectation. Anyway, I'll stop because that's yours. How can we protect what middle schoolers probably need and still help? And you started to address it. I just would like you to go a little deeper with it.
So, Madam Chair and Board Member Peterson, I received a lot of communication from teachers at the middle school level who have asked, what can we do to have greater accountability for students at the middle school level? Because they're not credit-bearing courses unless they have an Algebra 1. And they feel like students become very apathetic in middle school because they don't necessarily have to pass all their courses and can be passed on if they take some, summer programming. And so I think that is the work that we could do in the future is what does that look like? Do we look at some type of policy or procedural directive in middle school where students have to pass their 4 academic core classes or a certain number of classes? They have to take something during the summer. I think that's just been the greatest question is what can we do about that? Because then they get to high school and in that 9th grade year, they are credit-bearing courses and they're not used to that. And so when I can, not pass this class and just go to summer school. When they have to go to summer school to recover 3 classes, it's almost impossible for them to catch up. And they end up feeling that it's impossible and they become our dropouts. And so we need to do better. I think I wrote some notes here about informing our families and our students about what opportunities their students have. What are the options that they have in doing this work for this specific goal? We realized our district offers a lot to kids and families, and we have a lot of options, and that could be a blessing and a curse, right? But I think we can do a better job of informing families early on, not in 9th grade of what career pathway they can be a part of, but in elementary school. Like if these are the programs that are available and you can start in middle school by taking this class that will feed into the high school that you go to and start building that relationship. But I think that's part of the work. There's a lot to it. There's not a silver bullet. But I think we realized there's work to do and we're excited about it.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question and then I'll go back to the rest of the board. I guess one of the things that stood out for me, obviously, was that distinction between males and females. And I will just say is because it also matches with labor force participation in our state. So our labor force participation amongst males is already lagging. So obviously it's sort of starting in this area. Something has gone, something is happening there. So I guess from a strategic perspective, as we're doing these SREB pieces, I'm hoping that the report tells us, like you said, the things that we're doing, but what are the protective factors, obviously, right, for some students and that are participating in something. And I'm curious, what those are for young men, because I think we're going to have to pay real close attention to what young men are doing. So I don't know if you're already starting to think of some strategies around our young men as a whole, as you looked at this, if that caused you to think anything differently or about approaching the work a little bit differently from that perspective.
Board President Cordova, I know a small initiative that's occurring in the Office of Equity involving young Black males. And I know it was modeled after a national program, but I don't think I'm comfortable speaking as to how far along that is or how active it is. But I do think that we have a pretty solid team over in Equity now. And we have some leaders that I think will take further steps than where we have in the past, because clearly what we've done in the past isn't enough. But I have a group of people now that I think really see the potential to do things different and want to change their behaviors to support kids in different ways. You may see changes in the way we do Black Student Union, for example, but that's just an example.
Okay. Any other questions? Go ahead, Peggy.
So I mean, I saw the, had 1,000 1,059 students that dropped out. And so, I mean, when I'm looking at the graph and I'm seeing our Yazi Martinez and African-American students, and their dropout is like, you know, right at about 4%. So that's not great, but it's not like absolutely horrible. So that's a positive thing to look at. But when I was looking at the, you know, number of students who dropped out, and this might go to Dr. Bowman. So do you have those numbers by school? And if you have them by school, what are the schools, and I know that might be difficult for you, what are they learning? If it is like higher at one school than somewhere else, like, are there strategies perhaps different at a school that has a higher number? Are there some schools that have very few that maybe we could learn some strategies from?
So thank you for the question, Board Member Mueller-Aragon. So we do have a plethora of ways that the dropout numbers are kind of broken out. This is just one version of it, and I will pass it over to Dr. Gonzalez, I guess, to talk about the details.
In terms of response, a couple things come to mind. Every school is allocated an at-risk budget that they have to justify their expenditure for targeting the at-risk student population. So there is a nuance school by school in regards to how they are addressing this from a wraparound services point of view, a targeted point of view, guidance counselors, supporting our different student groups that may be referenced. So every school, the point is, has a plan on how they're doing this. There's another piece that I think is worth mentioning in that every high school, for example, we've gotten school designations recently, and we have what are called MRI grad schools. These schools, in addition to their at-risk justifications, have to develop very targeted and intentional plans on how they are going to do exactly what you've indicated with their student populations that have been identified. So this work does exist and is evolving in regards to response to the referenced groups.
Okay, so there is that accountability, superintendent, right? There's the accountability for spending the money the way they need to spend it for those children. And so that is the accountability piece at the school level then.
Right. Now, for the purpose of tonight's conversation, remember, this was a district-wide conversation. So we didn't really do a lot of digging into individual schools, but behind the scenes, you really have to remember that there was Dr. Segura put together a framework for leadership and instruction in the district. And what you're starting to see now when you go out into the schools is you're starting to see the alignment of what we are trying to do. The goals are appearing, all right? They are putting up, she just showed me today, a school with wildly important goals and posting their data so that people can see that. Point is that they are aligning their thinking and their systems around what you have identified as valuable, right? 90-day plans should reflect work towards district goals. They should no longer just be a compliance piece. This is a pretty fundamental shift in this type of work. In the past, you wrote a 90-day plan and we were told something to the effect of have a math goal, have a literacy goal, and something your school picked. So you wrote a plan, somebody came and looked at it. That was kind of it. We sent the plan to the state. We wondered if anybody ever read it at the state. You know, we didn't think it was happening, but this has changed because now, just like you have tied my evaluation to the goals, we're going to have to work with our principals about their evaluations and how they should look moving forward. And we have been working on job descriptions and adding this language into job descriptions where we can to make sure that people understand this is actually part of the job. So there's a lot of the the legwork. So when you say holding them accountable, yeah. But remember, we have to build a system in place that allows us to hold them accountable and has the language for what that would look like and how we both celebrate and critique outcomes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Go ahead, Board Member Gonzalez.
Dr. Gonzalez kind of stole my question with his answer that he already gave to the previous question, but it was going to be that there's clear integration between goals 3 and 4 as we think about some of the skills, habits, and successes that are skills, habits, and mindsets that are important to life success. So certainly if students are building and increasing their competencies and perseverance, self-regulation, self-efficacy, they are more likely to complete high school. And so given that, I'm curious if you could share a little bit more about the integration of strategies across goals 3 and 4 as you think about building of those social emotional skills. So that's sort of the strategic part of the question. And then sort of the tactical part is what is the timing for the first implementation of the Panorama survey so we could have some of that baseline data around levels of student engagement by the different student groups by grade level, so that we can sort of use that as part of early warning, but also sort of begin to understand where our problem areas are when it comes to student engagement.
Member Gonzalez, members of the board, the latter part of your question, Panorama will be here for the official launch next week to begin to intentionally look at the rollout plan. We have a target of a November survey so that we will get the first baseline data that will inform us with some next step data that we can look at that can be correlated as we continue to flesh out and anticipate our presentation to the board in, I believe, February with the first progress monitoring around goal 4. Dr. Segura alluded to this earlier in that on a weekly basis, the goal leads. So for example, Mr. Garcia and Associate Superintendent Garcia and Associate Superintendent Jett for goal 3 and 4 are part of that team. And we are looking at a cadence of accountability on a weekly basis as we are looking at the rollout of these goals, the connectivity of the goals, critiquing as critical friends the work of the goals, as we are seeing how the connection exists. I think certainly through this conversation, there has been several examples of how middle school to high school experience are connected in terms of preparing the whole child for a proper articulation or to high school. So the work is definitely rolling out quickly, and we are we're excited to be rolling out the specificity around goal 4 and how it will relate to goals 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. Board Member Tapia Romero, do you have any? Board Member Peterson?
Yes, I'll thank Ashley for giving us a little template of how we can ask questions appropriately. So, given what we know about the challenges of our teacher shortage and our workforce shortage, how that impacts really severely the implementation of all of these goals. What can be done to really accelerate finding, training, hiring, getting in the classroom, getting in school buses, getting at CEC additional staff?
Board Member Peterson, Madam President, I'm not 100% sure you're going to like the answer.
I know.
Because I think it's a very, I don't want to say it's an unfair question to ask, but it's borderline because I don't know what you want us to do, and I'm not saying that directly to you because it's a question I hear from a whole lot of people in the public. Well, why don't you just hire more people? Like we're sitting on crowds and crowds of people. Then you'll bump into people and they'll say, well, I'm a teacher and I can't get hired. Or they'll tell you, I have a friend who can't get hired and they're a teacher. And I will say, we probably interviewed them. And there's probably a reason, because they're not coming in, and especially in special ed. So I will say on the short term, when we met with UNM yesterday, some of my recommendations were to immediately begin the implementation of letters training for incoming teachers, immediately begin the implementation of classroom behaviors to help them have a shot out there with the kids that are coming in. But long-term, they need to also get active on the recruitment trail. And someone mentioned that they attended that college, and they said, when I came here, the building was full, it was vibrant, there was stuff going on, people cutting paper and group projects and activities. You go in there now, pretty quiet. And there are classrooms and there are kids in there, but it can't just be us. It has to be this bigger picture, and it does need to be the state. I do think the public education department gets it. I have seen some just social media. I was offered an opportunity to learn how to be a teacher today, and I thought that was interesting. And so it's out there. They are trying, and we've got to do more of that. And as a district, we've got to be aggressive in our recruitment. The residency programs are step one. We just need to expand them and grow them. But to do that, we've got to convince people that they can come in. And I think we have to take some shots on people. Kind of like I said, if you want to run our AP numbers up in Yazzie Martinez, then you're going to have to take some shots on some kids. I think it's the same in the adult world. If we're going to really want to increase our number of Native American educators, we really want to increase our number of bilingual educators, then we're going to have to go out there and say, all right, we'd love to get you in here. And if they're like, well, and we think, man, they don't seem committed. No, we've got to put the full court press and take a few shots. Because otherwise we are going to move to a system like I see done in other states where they just bring in unlicensed people. They're basically just putting people in the classroom and saying, thanks for showing up. Hope you know what you're doing. And I just don't see good outcomes in that. But that's where we're heading. It's a national emergency. It's definitely a local emergency. When we're talking about special ed, and somebody said, well, why can't we just hire? I said, they're not there. There's nobody there. They're not coming. So we can only exist with what we have. And otherwise you will see a day when we start having to do very extreme steps just to have a body in the classroom. That nobody wants to get there, but this has been going on for a while, and it's really, I think it's past crisis point. I think we tipped over the cliff a couple of years ago.
I hesitated to ask because I knew that was going to be an unfair question, but it needs to be spoken. And it sounds like there are some ideas of how to start really working with communities, with our communities, to recruit, and doing it very intentionally and consciously.
Well, we know in the newcomer program that we think we found some teachers, and I know Antonio now on some connections there to try to figure out a residency for them. So that'll help some, and anything helps. But again, it's like I said, hey, we had 25 teachers in the EA residency to become special ed teachers. Super, I need 150. So
May I ask a follow-up to that?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sure it has, but just as I'm working this through my brain, has there been a pathway designed, like I guess a career lattice even for our EAs? So they can walk through the whole, okay.
very nice residency program that helps them become a classroom teacher. That was our number one group we turned to, and they have some interest.
Do we see a high participation rate, and because they get their schooling for free? And
I think I don't have those numbers, and of course somebody's but last I heard there's about 25 in the program,
especially now that we have the opportunity scholarship. So you would hope that would relieve the financial burden of going to school, but okay.
Okay. Board Member Gonzalez, do you have a follow-up or? Or another question?
I don't know that it's necessarily a question for tonight, but maybe it's for a future progress monitoring session. Because I noted that in the section around what we're going to do next steps, and a couple of these, you have systemic next steps around resource allocation. And so I was wanting to ask just around what you are anticipating in terms of budgetary implications, what those resource allocations might look like, what strategies might you use to be strategic about resource allocation and reallocation. So if you can answer any of those, that's fine. But I also was just thinking as we move forward with our progress monitoring, it'd be helpful to sort of have some of that budgetary and financial information, if there are budgetary implications, included in the report. So more than anything, that's a statement that would help. If you can't answer any of those tonight, that'd be bonus points.
I do think well, I'm not going to answer the question tonight, not because I can't, but because I don't have enough of the specific data that would
that's cool.
can help you. What I will say is we spent the last 2 days with ERS going through some pretty interesting data points, and I don't know if you guys are doing that soon. You're going to see the same presentation we've seen. We've been looking at some schools, and we've been breaking it down by schools to see how they're funded. And then what we've discovered is the need to really focus down on how they're spending the money that they've got. So sometimes in the budget, it'll say something to the effect of other position. What is it? And so that's where you really have to know exactly how that's funded. We also have some thoughts on, how money flows to schools and how much needs to be restricted by law and how much is restricted by district policy and how much is restricted by culture. And so looking at some training for our decision makers on campuses, because a lot of times we place people in a decision-making capacity, but they don't have the necessary training to really understand what they're looking at. And so somebody acts like they know what they're doing, says this is the way we should go, and everybody goes, good thing he knew or she knew, let's go that way. So there's some thoughts on that, but I do know that we're going to have to really make sure people understand that when they have discretionary money, what can they do and how free are they? And that's a philosophical pull that we're going to have at the district level. And I've been through it on both sides. We went through a period where central office just gave you money. You didn't really have any say on it at all. You could put some more in, paper if you wanted to, or shift some, but there's very little you worked with. And then it went to, you get to make all the decisions. They gave us 20 minutes of training on how to put the money in the boxes. And so we went, okay. And we built our schools, and that didn't go well. And so, but after about 2 years of it, we started to get a little better. We could start figuring ways to flex our money. And then central office came and took it back because there was too many things that were going on that didn't align to anything. It was just schools making decisions based on what they thought was best, but it didn't help K-12. There was no continuum. So it came back to central office. So I think we're now back to where's the median? Where is the middle ground where we say, these are the immutables that we have to keep tight. This must happen, but you can do what you want with the rest. What'll happen is there's going to be issues with, FTEs, and because people are going to say, well, we really need to have X instead of Y, but we have Y, so what do we do with Y? And that's where things are going to get slightly messy, but we're not there at that point, but that is a process that we're going through with the ERS group.
Ms. Mueller ought to go. Do you have some more questions or?
I could keep going, but let's move on.
We'll just move on. Do you have another question or are we good?
I'm good for now.
Okay. Okay.
Conversations will continue.
Yeah, I think it will too. My last question is just really around the strategy and thinking about special ed students. And as we've been looking at this and you looked at the data and the reports and the activities, what are some strategies that you're thinking about around the special ed side of this and the special ed lens, especially around career readiness?
President Montoya Cordova, members of the board, thank you for the question. I think a lot is going to have to do with the way we approach pre-registration for all of our students, including special education. Today, our curriculum assistant principals gathered and they are having ongoing conversations on how they are going to market courses, pre-register students for courses, think about this work differently, push on the status quo for how we are offering courses that the students are really wanting to take to keep them engaged in their high school experience. And what does that look like? So I think that's a general statement for all students, but with great intentionality for our student, special education student population as well. Schools often function off an annual cycle, and we don't have any time to waste. And in January, we start registering for next school year. So I'm proud of the work that our teams have been doing to prepare for a strong 24-25, because the preparation for that, we start sending our course catalogs to print before winter break. So there's a lot of work being done around your very question and the way we're going to approach enrollment for the new school year beginning after the holidays.
Okay. And I know that there was some questions around especially the CTE and industry partners and how we engage in that so that they're our partners in the educational side of that. What are some of the ways that we're using current industry partners to help us expand or to grow CTE in a different way? So it's not just, not just so that it's just finding classroom teachers to do this because there's an industry, lots of industry out there that have the expertise, but how do we have, will the SREB help us find and identify places where we have had success with alternative ways of bringing in industry partners?
President Montoya Cordova, members of the board, one real exciting takeaway from our middle school SREB visits is that through the leadership of our director, Tori Stevens, we now have officially recognized career and connected learning programs at more than a few of our middle schools that are articulated to our high schools. And just today with a conversation with another one of our middle schools, making that connection for how they can be part of the success breeds success. And what we're seeing is we have this articulated. And once you start building these programs, funding comes with it. So you're able to get the support for these career and connected learning opportunities. So that has been a very tangible reality or result of our middle school visits, and the support from our industry partners have started to bleed into our middle schools, with also the realization that we can't do everything for everybody everywhere. So these visits have helped us align our limited resources by pathways through feeder patterns as we look at how we can leverage our limited resources beginning in elementary into middle school onto high school.
Okay. Yep. Any other questions? We're good. Okay. I just want to say thank you too for all of the information. I know it was, although it was hard to see the data sometimes in some of our spaces where it's, where it's not as great for some students, the experience isn't equitable, right? I mean, there are some students that are experiencing things in a different way. And, but I liked that it puts it out there and we can see and hone in where we need to so that we can make that, because some of them it's as high as a 20-point gap, so we've got huge gaps to fix. And I was struck by the gaps, but I was also struck by the opportunity that I think it could bring for us if we're really intentional and we can get to the work and really hold ourselves accountable to the things that we want to change. So I appreciate I just really appreciate all the access to all the data too, and sort of linking for us as board members, places that we could go to sort of study even more or dive in deeper. That reminder on SAPR and how it's linked to those pieces and the additional dashboards and such that you provided. Okay, so let me see. We have completed this part. Ashley, I'm just gonna phone a friend at this point, but we've done this part. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add here to just having, observed us through this process before I go to the next step.
Yeah, so I have a couple of pieces of coaching. So first of all, I want to, I'm going to offer some coaching for the administration. And so one of the pieces of coaching that I regularly provide to administrative teams, and one that you all have received from me and from my colleague AJ when we began this process, is not to sugarcoat the data. There are some things that are listed in this report that are specifically under what's not working, that can be things that are hard to hear. The fact that you named the hard stuff and identified how you're working on it is really impressive. Telling the hard truth isn't fun, but it's also the first thing that you have to do in order to grow. And so definitely want to celebrate that fact and pat you on the back for being willing to engage in some of the just more difficult parts of the conversation, especially when we start talking about equity and the way that just the disparities between how different groups are achieving or are realizing educational justice, and how some groups are not receiving that benefit. It's not something that's really productive to get deep into a shame spiral about. And the board should be celebrated for not allowing that to happen and to not going there. They're actually, and that was one of the things that I was kind of waiting on edge, are they gonna do it? But you didn't, and you celebrated it. And Board Member Peterson, you actually named it out loud. So great job with that. For the and also for the staff. So telling in your report, and your presentation, you told a lot of stories that painted a fuller picture of the situation on the ground. And by adding that context to the challenges that you're facing on the management side, it provides a glimpse into your thought processes and decisions that you all have to make, which is going to, one is going to help not only the board, but also your community just have a deeper understanding of what the facts are on the table. For the board, so first of all, Yolanda already mentioned it, but I'm going to mention it again. You did a great job with everyone submitting questions beforehand. You clearly did your homework. Also, great job for everyone with engaging. Every single person asked questions. Every single person asked smart questions. In fact, the majority of the questions that the board asked tonight were smart. It is rare to see from a board where you actually demonstrate this level of question asking this early in the process, because this is still technically a practice monitoring session. So great job with that. One thing where, so just a little bit of coaching to improve upon. So the conversation really does need to remain focused on the goal that is being monitored and keeping the conversation at a district level. It's really easy, and it's always there's always a pull to want to get into what the campus level conversation is and how things are being done school by school. But this is this board's perspective has to remain district wide, And so these monitoring conversations for the same reason have to remain district-wide. And on that same note, the goal that is actually being monitored is the one that you need to stick to. And so, kind of veering off into like connections to other goals and other priorities that have been set. Those are all really great questions, but they can distract from the overall conversation that's happening in the monitoring session. And so those are great questions to ask beforehand or even after the fact. And doing it beforehand or after the fact allows the staff to be able to draw those connections in future reports. So with that, great job, everybody. And you can now, I'll turn it back over to you, President, and y'all can go on to consider accepting the report.
Hey, so we're at this point where we're going to actually work to accept our first report. And on this one, there's 3 basic questions. Does reality match the vision? Is there growth towards the vision? And 3, is there a strategy and plan sufficient to cause growth towards the vision? And so if we answer yes to all 3, then we can be confident that the data is accurate and that the superintendent is performing basically on the report that's in front of us. If the answer is, only 1 or 2 of these questions is a yes, and there's, one that is still lacking, or you're not sure on that, we may have to table the matter, and we'd have to bring it back at one of our next meetings, hopefully within a month or so that we could get some additional information. And if the answer to all 3 is no, that, we just don't feel like it's not there, the vote basically informs the superintendent that we failed to meet the expectations of the monitoring and should be used with discretion, so that the board vote is simply to accept the report and not ever to approve the strategies or plan that the superintendent has presented. So I guess I just will go back and ask if there's a motion to accept this progress monitoring report based on where we are.
I will move that we accept the report.
Okay, so there's a whole statement in there, acceptance of the progress monitoring reports for goal 3, interim goals 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, focusing on post-secondary readiness. I'll state it, and then focusing on post-secondary readiness. And Board Member Peterson has offered a motion in that. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, so we have a motion, a second. Any other discussion?
Can you read those again? Just so I can make sure when I vote what we really needed to see to accept it.
So if the answer is yes, okay, so does reality match the vision? Is there growth towards the vision? And 3, is there a strategy and plan sufficient to cause growth towards the vision? So if we're answering all 3 is yes, then the board can accept the monitoring report, confident that the data is accurate and the superintendent is performing. So any other discussion? I will call for the vote then.
Peggy Mueller Aragon,
Yes.
Danielle Gonzalez,
Yes.
Barbara Peterson,
Yes.
Crystal Tapia Romero,
Yes.
Yolanda Montoya Cordova.
Yes, yay, how exciting. We've accepted our first progress monitoring report. Congratulations, that's great. All right. Thank you so much to all of you for being here with us tonight. So our next item is just a real quick president's report. I just wanted to give an update to the board on the superintendent search firm. So as previously mentioned, members of Board of the Education's Executive Committee have been part of a team that has reviewed proposals for a superintendent search and recruitment firm. Other evaluation committee members included our Chief Financial Officer, Renette Apodaca, who represented the administration, and Heather Sneddon, who is the audit committee member who represented the community. The evaluation committee reviewed 6 proposals, first as individuals and then as a group. And the firms were Alma, Agility, Hazard, Young, Atea Associates, also known as HYA, Ideal Team Consulting, JG Consulting, and McPherson and Jacobson. The vendors were ranked, and the top two firms were Alma and McPherson and Jacobson were interviewed by the committee. The committee recommended McPherson and Jacobson, one of the nation's leading national superintendent search firms, to help with the APS search. And the administration has entered into contract negotiations and hopes to have a contract in place by the end of the month. We're still on track to having a superintendent selected in the spring and in place by July 1. So just wanted to give you all an update on where we were. It was a very lively process. I really appreciate the committee members that are on there. And I will add that our community member, Heather Sneddon, it was excellent to have her voice and her perspective there, because a lot of things that hadn't thought about from a community perspective. So that living up to our guardrail around community voice and participation, that was really sweet. That was really nice to have her on there. And then I just want to close with one more thing. This is Community Schools Coordinator Appreciation Week. So there's a lot of, if you haven't looked on Facebook, they're highlighting each community school coordinator. I think that's really incredible. It's such a nice program. And so just want to acknowledge our community schools coordinators that are working for the district and all of the great work they do there. And then I'm going to, gosh, I lost my notes, but the other thing, we had a meeting, I know on the right sizing committee, we had a bit of a coaching call with this, and Peggy is going to give an update on where we are with this right sizing committee.
Right, so we met with Dr. Blakey, and also our coach, Ashley, was there with us. And so what we've come to some decisions. So the right sizing discussion group, I mean, it served a really important role and kept us informed on all the challenges the district was facing because of declining enrollment. We had lots of informative meetings, and we looked at several recommendations that were presented to us, and that I did update, the board on those discussions. And then we met, as I said, with the coach and with Dr. Blakey to just kind of discuss what that committee's role really was as it concerns our governance structure. And so what we came to the conclusion was that the work ahead really belongs to the administration. And they have their own right sizing committee already. And so the staff is going to continue to meet with the Community Capital Advisory Commission to explore ongoing issues and concerns as it concerns right sizing. And the superintendent will keep us updated on that committee and the work that they are doing internally. And they'll inform us when they plan to go out to the communities to talk about some of the recommendations they may have. And I'm hopeful that the Community Capital Advisory Commission that was created to report to the board will be able to report directly to us whenever they feel that that's necessary. So that's a piece that we just need to make sure that we are hearing from that Community Capital Advisory Commission as they were to report directly to the board. And the administration is who's going to be coming, all the recommendations will come to the board before us for us to look at them. So that's where we are right now with right sizing.
Right. Go ahead. We saw a committee that was going into perpetuity is what it was. And that's like, can't do that.
I think it makes sense to streamline that process at the same time. So is this the group that exists now that Josefina has been sitting on? So my concern with that committee is that it's very industry dominant, that there is on there really, although they're all substantial, or they're all honest and good people, and we need their voice, but and many of them are parents of children in APS. And at the same time, they represent very heavily the industry side and not other parts of our community. And so we certainly need to listen to them and learn from their wisdom, but that's only a part of the community. And so I'm really concerned that if they're making the initial recommendations solely, it's not going to reflect the needs of our community.
And that's not how it's going to work. I mean, that is just one committee that I know that Dr. Blakey is currently working with, but there's a lot of internal work that's going on, internal and external to like the school communities that they're working with. So with the parents and the school communities that are potentially impacted by some of our decisions, there's intentional work that's going on in that process. And there's a real commitment at the district level to, one, engage with the community, but also to include the board members in that community outreach and engagement when the support is needed. What we were just finding with that group is that it was just kind of like we were going on and under a committee structure with boards and what our lane is and what the work is, it was not fitting. And so it was, and I know Dr. Blakey was really looking to us also for some support and trying to figure out how do we structure this. So we had we had a good coaching call on that so that we could make sure that we were not, that we also were not in this specific role, because we should really be looking at recommendations that are coming to us based on like all of the feedback, all of the hard work that they've done at that point to help us, to help make a decision about what's best for a particular community. But there's a real commitment to making sure that that community engagement, knowing that the guardrail is there around community engagement, staff voice, student voice, so that we can make sure that we're making the decisions using that value. That's a really important value. So it's not just that committee.
The goal is to make sure that we listen to public input and that we're informed and that we are, that we will attend those meetings, that we will be invited and we will attend as well.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. The other thing I just want to remind the board, I will be out all next week. Yes. Yes, it's all next week. I'm trying to remember. Am I out next week? Yes, I'm out next week. Then the following week, I will be in Portland with my grandgirls. So for the finance committee coming up and that board meeting, vice president's going to be chairing in my absence on that date that I'm in Portland with my girls. So with that, the next Board of Education meeting will be October 4th, 2023 at 5 p.m. Special Board of Education meeting will be September 27th, 2023 at 5:15 p.m. or immediately following the Finance Committee meeting. Meetings will be held here at the Allison Bruce King Educational Complex and live streamed at aps.edu. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.